listening right now.
We are talking directly to you.
Have you ever felt like modern holidays have just been completely detached from their ancient roots?
Oh, totally. Like something is just missing.
Right. Like somewhere along the line, we traded in these primal fire-lit traditions of our ancestors for pastel colors.
Pastel colors and massive sugar crashes.
Exactly. And just endless, mindless consumerism. So if you've ever had that nagging feeling that a raw, vital energy was basically replaced by a sterilized pageant, you are exactly in the right place today.
It is a feeling that I think a lot of people have, right? But very few actually track it down to its historical origins.
Which is exactly what we are doing today on this deep dive. But hey, before we get into the heavy lifting, do us a huge favor and hit that like button.
And subscribe to the show, please.
Yeah, subscribe so you never miss a deep dive. It takes just a second, and it guarantees you'll keep getting, this exact level of analysis.
It genuinely helps us bring these extensive explorations to you guys.
Because, wow, today's mission is massive. We are looking at a brand new, highly controversial ebook called Eli5 Easter.
Subtitled, The Simple Guide for Red-Pilled Men.
Right, by an author named Conrad Riker. Now, I want to be crystal clear right out of the gate regarding who this deep dive is custom tailored for.
We have to set the stage here.
We do. This is specifically designed for a men's rights activist audience and, red-pilled men in the manosphere who are deeply interested in understanding the history of our institutions.
Specifically understanding them before they were captured.
Captured by feminists and Marxists, which is exactly how the author describes it.
Yeah.
And listen, if today's deep dive piques your interest as we get into the mechanics of these arguments, you absolutely need to check out Amazon Kindle.
Or Google Playbooks.
Yeah, Google Playbooks to buy this ebook for yourself. It is just a wildly intricate read.
It really is. And before we dive into the text itself, I just want to calmly set the framework for our conversation today.
Which is super important.
Right. The source material we are examining today contains heavily politically charged content. I mean, Riker is offering a severe, uncompromising critique of both left-wing ideologies and modern institutional structures.
He's not hold back.
No, he doesn't. And as your guides on this deep dive, we are not endorsing or taking sides on these viewpoints.
We are strictly neutral here.
Exactly. Our mission is simply to impartially report on the contents provided in the text. We're here to help you understand the fascinating, unapologetic arguments contained in Riker's original work.
We're just looking at how he constructs his thesis, right?
Yeah, the mechanisms behind his claims and, what evidence he actually uses to back them up.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because the core premise of Riker's book rests on what he calls the historical deconstruction of Easter.
Which is a huge claim.
It is. He's making the case that the holiday we recognize today is essentially an institutional imposter.
That is the foundation of his entire argument. Riker's central thesis is that the spring equinox and, what eventually became Easter, was originally a celebration defined by fire, blood, and what he terms masculine resurrection.
Masculine resurrection. I mean, that sounds intense.
It's meant to. He argues that over the centuries, this warrior-centric primal celebration was systematically neutered.
And he claims this wasn't an accident, right?
Not at all. He posits that various historical institutions actively wanted to tame the male population, and they used the calendar to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, he lays out a very specific timeline of this institutional capture, and he traces the very first domino falling all the way back to 325 AD.
Right, he calls this the Nicene betrayal. And I know the Council of Nicaea is usually discussed in terms of theological doctrine, but Riker looks at it through a purely sociological lens.
A completely sociological and biological lens, yeah.
He claims Emperor Constantine orchestrated history's greatest bait and switch.
He does. And to understand Riker's point here, we have to look at the landscape of the Roman world just prior to 325 AD.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
Well, Riker points out that the dominant spiritual force among Roman legions wasn't some passive religion. It was Mithraism.
Okay, Mithras, the warrior deity.
Exactly. The pre-Nicene spring rituals associated with these cults were intensely physical. I mean, Riker describes historical accounts of men wrestling naked at dawn.
Wait, hold on. Naked wrestling at dawn.
Naked wrestling, undergoing severe physical endurance tests, reciting battle poetry, and swearing literal blood oaths to Mithras.
Okay, let me stop you there, because the jump from naked wrestling and blood oaths to sitting quietly in a pew is massive.
It is a totally different universe.
So how does Riker explain that transition? I mean, does he think Constantine just outlawed the naked wrestling overnight?
Not overnight, no, but systematically. Riker's argument is that an expanding empire requires administrative compliance, not martial independence.
That makes sense.
Right. If you have legions of men whose primary loyalty is forged through blood oaths to a warrior god, they are inherently dangerous to a centralized bureaucracy.
Because you can't control them.
Precisely. Riker argues that Constantine used the Council of Nicaea to standardize religious practice in a way that intentionally stripped out those virile physical tests of loyalty.
So they swapped out the action for observation.
Exactly. The institution swapped the visceral, active participation of the warrior for the passive worship and quiet contemplation of the congregant.
And Riker claims this was the first, most crucial step in erasing the warrior soul of the spring equinox.
He frames it as a matter of state security, yeah.
So the institution just couldn't risk having decentralized bands of hyper-masculine men bound by physical hardship.
It was too much of a threat.
It's like taking a gladiator arena and forcing everyone to just sit in a waiting room.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing is, he tracks this oppression out of antiquity and straight through the Middle Ages.
He does, and he moves into architecture next.
Right, he has a whole section on architecture, which he calls the Green Man Conspiracy of 1402 and 1543.
This is where Riker connects the theological shift to the actual physical environment. He focuses on the story of a Welsh stonemason named Rhys ap Gruffydd.
Okay, what did Rhys do?
Well, according to the text in 1402, this mason risked his life to carve masculine green men into the pillars of Llandaff Cathedral.
Now, for the listener who might not be familiar with medieval architecture, a green man is basically a sculpture of a rugged, intense male face.
Yeah, a face made entirely of or surrounded by leaves and vines.
And Riker views them as symbols of untamed biological masculinity, literally pushing through the stone of the church.
Precisely. It is raw nature asserting itself. And Riker states that church authorities found these carvings so deeply threatening to their sanitized aesthetic that they executed him.
They executed the stonemason.
They executed Rhys ap Gruffydd. The text claims they literally lopped off his head and stuck it on a pike as a warning.
Man, Riker calls the carvings a literal middle finger in limestone that the establishment just could not tolerate.
That is an exact quote, yeah.
But I want to understand the leap he makes here. I mean, why would an institution be so threatened by a carving of a face made of leaves?
Because, in Riker's view, symbols dictate psychology.
Okay.
The Green Man represented a pagan ancestral memory of male ferocity in connection to the wild. And the institutional church at the time was trying to cultivate obedience.
You can't cultivate domestic obedience in an environment that visually glorifies untamed nature.
Exactly. And Riker connects this architectural censorship to a broader liturgical shift. He notes that by 1543, churches had systematically scoured their rituals of anything connected to the earth.
Right, he talks about the sacraments here. He claims that earlier, localized traditions actually involved acorn-based sacraments.
Which he links directly to ancient druidic virility rituals.
Because the oak tree and the acorn have long been symbols of endurance and male fertility, right?
Yes, absolutely. Riker argues that the institutional church actively sought out these localized masculine rituals and replaced them with uniform, passive, gluten-free wafers.
Gluten-free wafers.
Wow. He views this not as a theological refinement, but as a deliberate psychological move to separate men from the raw materials of nature.
And force them to consume a highly processed institutional product. It's a really aggressive reading of history, framing every liturgical change as an act of psychological warfare against men.
It is aggressive, but he builds a very cohesive narrative out of it.
But where his argument really picks up steam, and honestly, where the modern aesthetic of Easter starts to take a massive hit in this book, is his analysis of the Victorian era.
Oh, he completely goes after the Victorian.
He destroys them. He points to 1874, claiming that British feminists actually petitioned Parliament to ban spring bonfires.
This is a crucial turning point in Riker's timeline, because for centuries, the anchor of the spring celebration was the communal bonfire. It was dangerous, it was hot, it involved gathering massive amounts of heavy wood. It was a physically demanding, masculine enterprise.
And Riker documents how in 1874, temperance movements and early feminist groups began lobbying Parliament for it.
Yes. They labeled these fires as barbaric, unruly, and a direct threat to public morals.
And according to Riker, they succeeded by 1882. The bonfires were essentially regulated out of existence.
But it's what replaced them that Riker really focuses on.
Yeah, he outlines what he terms the Domestic Sedation Act of the 1890s. Can we dig into the mechanics of this? Because he's suggesting a literal conspiracy between activists and industry.
He absolutely is. Riker claims that during the 1890s, emerging fabric mills actively partnered with temperance activists.
Like a backroom deal.
Kind of, yeah. The industrial machine needed people to buy new seasonal clothing, and the activists wanted to civilize men.
So their shared goal, according to the text, was to flood the spring market with lavender sachets, floral prints, and pastel colors.
Riker argues that the sudden explosion of pastel colors in the late 19th century wasn't just a shift in fashion.
It was psychological warfare.
Yes, a form of psychological warfare.
But how so? Like, what is the psychological mechanism he's pointing to with the colors?
Well, he argues it functions as sensory deprivation of the martial spirit.
Sensory deprivation.
Right. If you surround a man with the visual language of aggression fire, iron, dark earth tones, he behaves one way.
Makes sense.
But if you force him into an environment completely saturated with soft pastels, lace, and doilies, you are systematically domesticating his visual field.
You're softening his reality.
Exactly. Riker asserts it was a concerted effort to erase the aggressive aesthetic of the past and enforce compliance through social dress codes.
So, if you're a Victorian man, you've basically gone from standing around a roaring bonfire in a heavy wool coat to sitting in a parlor wearing a stiff pastel suit eating a crumpet.
The sheer contrast is wild.
It really is. But that brings us to 1953, and what is arguably the most fascinating, bizarre, and just meticulously researched part of the historical section.
Oh, yes.
What Riker aggressively calls the bunny castration.
This is where Riker transitions from aesthetics to media conditioning. He details how, in 1953, McCall's magazine ran a highly influential campaign.
And this campaign intentionally swapped out the traditional Germanic hair for the modern pastel bunny.
Yes. And I think we really need to pause and explain the difference here, because zoologically, it's a massive distinction.
It's huge. And Riker builds a huge part of his thesis on it. He points out that the historical symbol of spring was the hare, not the rabbit.
Right.
And a hare is a solitary, aggressive fighter. It doesn't burrow, it lives above ground.
Right.
Riker notes that it was used in Egyptian hieroglyphs as a symbol of vigilance.
Roman soldiers wore harefoot charms for luck in war.
Right. And during mating season, hares will literally stand on their hind legs and box each other to the death.
They are entirely different creatures, biologically and symbolically. The hare is liminal, fast, and dangerous.
But, as Riker points out, McCall's magazine had a problem.
They wanted to sell sewing patterns and domestic lifestyle products to suburban housewives in the post-war boom.
And you can't effectively sell a cozy domestic lifestyle using an animal known for brawling in the wilderness.
No, you definitely cannot. So they softened the edges.
They push this floppy-eared, cuddly, domesticated bunny instead, and Riker notes that their sales tripled.
But he views this as far more insidious than just a successful marketing campaign, right?
Oh yeah. He uses this 1953 pivot to argue that the modern bunny is the ultimate engineered symbol of emasculation.
He actually dives into the biology of the symbols we consume. He notes that the ears of a predator, like a wolf, stay erect and alert.
Always listening for danger.
Exactly. But rabbit ears, in the iterations pushed by modern media, are limp and floppy.
And he frames this as a direct biological metaphor for compliance, submission, and passivity.
He actually backs us up with psychological data, doesn't he?
He does. He cites researchers from Zurich's ETH Institute studying Jungian archetypes.
Right.
According to the text, their studies claim that 89% of young boys, when left to their own devices, will instinctively choose predators or combative animals as their spirit totems.
Their psychology naturally gravitates towards strength and capability.
Exactly. Yet, Riker argues, society uses the spring holiday to forcefully imprint this docile, defenseless rodent upon them year after year.
He brings up some incredible media examples to prove this point, tracing how pop culture reinforced the shift.
Yeah, he looks at Warner Bros.
Yeah.
And Bugs Bunny in the 1940s and 50s.
He acknowledges that Bugs is a trickster archetype, But he points out that Bugs is a cross-dressing trickster who relies on sarcasm.
Saying, "What's up, Doc?" to outsmart the hunter rather than relying on physical dominance.
Right, and Riker compares this to the brawling Viking berserker hares depicted in the margins of medieval manuscripts.
Which are literally shown wielding axes and ripping out throats. I mean, the contrast he draws in media is stark.
He compares Disney's Thumper from Bambi, whom he disparagingly labels a vegan pacifist, to the infamous killer rabbit of Kerbonog from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yes. And while the Monty Python rabbit is obviously a comedy sketch, Riker argues that its sheer viciousness is actually much closer to historical and biological reality than the Disney version.
It's a very funny point, but he's dead serious about it.
So if we look at this entire historical progression, what is the ultimate takeaway? Because reading this first section, the analogy that comes to mind is that society took a Viking longship, built for rough seas, made of hardwood, designed for conquest.
Right.
They sanded down all the rough edges, painted it pastel pink, turned it into a swan pedal boat for a calm suburban lake.
And now they're scratching their heads wondering why men don't want to get on board.
Exactly.
I think that captures Riker's perspective perfectly. It's an analogy of structural degradation.
Yeah.
The underlying argument he is making through all of this historical analysis is that the symbols we consume actively shape our behavior.
By systematically removing symbols of strength, fire, and predation, and replacing them with pastels, bunnies, and candy.
Institutions have engineered a holiday that fundamentally excludes traditional masculinity.
Okay, so it's one thing for institutions to change the look of a holiday. Swapping bonfires for pastels or hares for bunnies, they could just be brushed off as changing aesthetics.
But Riker takes this a massive step further, doesn't he?
He does. He argues this isn't just about making things look pretty or tame. He claims this aesthetic shift is actually triggering a physiological change in men.
Exactly. This is where Riker transitions from historical sociology to endocrinology.
He connects this historical aesthetic shift directly to modern biological warfare against men.
He doesn't just think the pastel bunny is annoying or culturally degrading. He argues it is actively altering male physiology.
Which brings us to the second major pillar of the book: biological sabotage, diet, hormones, and what he calls the Easter sex strike.
A very provocative title.
Very. The book makes the outright claim that modern Easter traditions physically weaken men and suppress their testosterone. Let's look at the data he uses, because he doesn't just theorize, he brings in studies.
He relies on some very specific data points to make this case. Riker cites a 2021 Cambridge endocrinology study that tracked 500 men during the Easter season.
And according to his report of the study, what happened?
Blood work showed an 18% plunge in androgens, which are male sex hormones, in men who were actively participating in modern Easter activities.
Wow. So he's specifically talking about men forced to put on pastel button-downs, organize plastic A hunts in the yard, and essentially play the role of the docile suburban dad.
Correct. And to explain the mechanism behind why this happens, Riker draws a parallel to primatology.
Okay, how so?
Well, he notes that this 18% drop in androgens is the exact same physiological dip observed in captive primates during mating season droughts.
Wait, really?
Yeah, or when a male primate is repeatedly subjected to submissive postures by a dominant structure.
So the logic is that social compliance, forcing a man into an environment that his biology recognizes as emasculating, actually triggers a stress response that shuts down testosterone production.
That is exactly his argument.
He's saying that forcing a man to hide plastic eggs in the grass triggers a biological rebellion in his DNA.
Because for 200,000 years, boys were taught to hunt game and track prey.
Not scavenge for brightly colored jelly beans on a manicured lawn.
Right, and he pairs this biological data with sociological polling.
Yeah, citing 2022 Pew research showing that 72% of fathers find modern Easter to be girly and useless.
Riker argues that this isn't just toxic masculinity speaking, it is a primal biological intuition that the environment is hostile to their endocrine system.
And he says the modern diet associated with the holiday is acting as an accelerant to this hormone crash.
Oh, absolutely. He introduces this dietary counter protocol called Spartan fasting.
He is absolutely vicious about carbohydrates in this book. He literally calls carbs sissy particles.
He really hates carbohydrates. Riker's nutritional philosophy is a cornerstone of his biological argument.
He asserts that the sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and processed carbohydrates typical of modern Easter baskets create severe metabolic dependency.
And physical weakness.
Right. He explains the mechanism too. He says eating a croissant or a hollow chocolate bunny causes such a massive insulin spike that it leads to an immediate crash.
resulting in so much brain fog you'd mistake a Peloton for a personality.
That line is just brutal. But his argument is that metabolic lethargy creates political and social docility.
Exactly. If your blood sugar is constantly crashing, you lack the energy to challenge the institutional structures he discussed in the first section.
So what's his countermeasure?
He points to data from the MIT Food Lab. According to Raker, this research confirmed that meat-heavy carnivore diets increased testosterone production by 17% compared to plant-based diets.
Largely due to the bioavailability of saturated fats and cholesterol required for hormone synthesis.
Yes. And he gives this wild, highly specific example of how men are implementing this counter protocol.
He talks about a carnivore Easter hosted by a Texas CrossFit coach named Derek Sokoloff.
Picture this for a holiday gathering.
Yeah, 12 guys get together out in the scrub brush. No quinoa salads, no chickpea deviled eggs, absolutely zero pastel colors.
None.
They have a 200-pound wild boar being spit roasted over mesquite wood while they blast Ted Nugent's stranglehold from a truck radio.
And Riker claims that by sundown, fueled entirely by animal fat and protein, these guys had invented 3 new powerlifting techniques.
It's just a very vivid illustration of his thesis that protein, fire, and shared physical intensity build brotherhood.
Riker continually contrasts this raw survivalist approach with modern, sanitized dietary trends.
To hammer home the historical precedent, he brings up the ancient Viking tradition of losupa.
The blood broth.
Yes, the blood broth. A spring broth made of animal blood and marrow that packed 22 milligrams of iron per serving.
Raker notes that a single serving of this broth provided the biological equivalent of a massive ribeye steak,
flooding the body with the nutrients required for martial endurance.
He places this primal, nutrient-dense nutrition in direct, mocking opposition to modern dietary activism.
He specifically targets PETA activists who protest by gluing tofu to steakhouse windows during the spring season.
Which he thought was hilarious.
Because he notes the steakhouse owner just scraped the tofu off the glass and used it for skeet shooting targets.
Right. But beyond the humor, this entire biological section is tied to a much deeper theory of evolutionary psychology and mating,
which Riker dives into in Chapter 13, titled The Easter Sex Strike.
This is undoubtedly one of the most provocative chapters in the text. Riker approaches human mating from a strictly evolutionary perspective.
He asserts that regardless of modern social conditioning, women are biologically hardwired to recoil at male submission.
He relies on Dr. Helen Fisher's research here, right?
He does. He uses Fisher's data on attraction and neurochemistry to argue that women instinctively reward dominant provisioners.
Riker claims that women biologically reject inauthentic male compliance.
So, a father begrudgingly wearing bunny pajamas or pastel tie to appease his family is, in Riker's view, actively destroying his mate's biological attraction to him.
Because he is signaling submission to the institutional aesthetic.
He essentially says that women actually hate it when men play along with the sanitized version of the holiday, even if they are the ones demanding it.
And he shares this personal anecdote that is just peak Riker to prove his point.
Oh, the story's wild. He says last spring he had a Victoria's Secret gift card he was going to give his girlfriend for a holiday basket.
But he realized this was playing into the consumer pastel economy.
So he threw the gift card out and bought her a .45 ACP reloading press instead.
And according to the author, the reaction proved his evolutionary thesis.
Completely. He says it worked like a charm. She baked him a pie from scratch and asked him to teach her tactical shooting drills that afternoon.
His takeaway is that nothing says I love you to female biology like ensuring your partner has the tools to defend the homestead.
Right. Riker uses that anecdote to enforce his broader belief that evolutionary survival favors men who invest in tangible assets, skills, and security rather than appeasement through consumer goods.
He references a 2023 survey in the manosphere claiming that 68% of men reported their wives or partners became more agreeable and respectful after receiving tactical gear or survival training instead of candy.
His overarching conclusion for this chapter is that hypergamy, the instinctual drive to seek a capable, formidable protector, doesn't take holidays off.
But wait, I need to connect some dots here.
Yeah.
If men are being biologically weakened by the endocrine crash of participating in the holiday, domesticated by the aesthetics, and forced to eat sissy particles that cause brain fog, who is actually orchestrating this?
Like, who profits from the pastel prison?
Exactly. That question leads us directly into Riker's economic thesis.
Having established the historical capture and the biological toll, he turns his attention to the financial mechanics of what he calls the estrogen economy.
Raker argues that modern Easter isn't just an aesthetic annoyance or a biological hazard. It is a calculated, massive financial drain.
He views it as a literal grift.
Yes, he explicitly calls it a feminist grift designed by corporate structures to bankrupt men while simultaneously erasing their paternal authority.
Let's get into the mechanics of this grift. He introduces this concept of brunch debt and the Easter divorce bomb.
The numbers he pulls out to support this are staggering.
He cites a National Retail Federation study showing that 94% of Easter advertisements explicitly target women.
He unpacks the psychology behind that marketing. Riker argues that marketing firms know that guilt sells.
The advertising is designed to convince women that if they don't provide an extravagant, pastel-perfect holiday experience, they are failing as mothers.
But Riker notes, who actually finances this vision? He claims that the economic burden of this manufactured guilt falls squarely on men.
He draws a really sharp historical parallel here, comparing modern Easter spending to the 17th century Dutch tulip mania.
He literally calls the holiday a pastel-coded pyramid scheme.
In his view, men are pressured to act as human ATMs, financing extravagant Sunday brunches, expensive matching pastel clothing, and massive chocolate baskets that provide zero nutritional or survival value.
Riker claims this immense financial pressure, concentrated in a single spring weekend, is a primary catalyst for what he calls the Easter divorce bomb.
He describes an economy where women are socially conditioned to drive the spending, but men are expected to absorb the debt.
When the man eventually pushes back against this financial drain, it triggers domestic conflict.
Which Riker claims leads to a spike in spring divorce filings.
And he doesn't just blame corporations. He says the schools and the local communities are in on the grift too.
Specifically with these inclusive egg hunts.
Yes, Riker is highly critical of how the holiday is handled in public civic spaces. He labels modern inclusive egg hunts as Marxist indoctrination camps.
I have to admit, when I first read that, I laughed out loud. He calls the kids running around tiny Bolsheviks.
It's quite the image.
But how exactly does he map Marxist theory onto a community egg hunt? What's the philosophical link?
He focuses on the mechanics of the game. Traditionally, an egg hunt was competitive. It rewarded speed, observation, and merit.
The child who hustled the most got the most.
Right. Riker argues that modern inclusive hunts have removed competition. Organizers enforce the equal sharing of plastic eggs, ensuring no child feels left out.
And Riker argues that by removing competition and enforcing equal outcomes, children are being trained in forced wealth redistribution.
So he's saying that mapping a socialist framework onto a childhood game conditions them for adult political compliance.
Precisely. He highlights a specific event to anchor this claim: the Portland Rainbow Extravaganza.
According to the text, parents were charged $300 per child to attend.
And at the event, kids hunted for eggs that weren't filled with candy, but with pamphlets claiming gender is a social construct.
For Riker, this represents the ultimate weaponization of the holiday extracting capital from families to disseminate ideologies that dismantle traditional gender roles.
So, if you are a red-pilled man staring down the barrel of a $300 Marxist egg hunt and crushing brunch debt,
how do you fight back?
Yeah, because he doesn't just complain, he offers a highly specific financial exit strategy.
He does. Riker's solution is the crypto Easter underground. He tells men to completely and unapologetically opt out of what he calls the fiat Easter economy.
And for the listener, when he says fiat, he's using it as a double meaning.
Correct.
He means fiat currency, like the US dollar, but he's also using it as a metaphor for an artificially propped up, socially engineered holiday system that has no backing in biological reality.
He says, don't buy the chocolate, don't buy the brunch, buy hard assets.
He advises a full Easter blackout. Instead of participating in consumerism, he suggests reallocating those exact funds into untraceable or highly durable assets.
He lays out the exact math for this in what he calls the Odin portfolio.
It's basically a financial fallout shelter. If you have, say, $500 set aside for Easter expenses, he says you put 60% into crypto.
But not just any crypto, specifically privacy coins like Monero and Bitcoin.
And he is adamant that they must be stored only on cold, hard wallets, because he says leaving your assets on a cloud exchange is for beta males.
Then 30% goes into ammunition because he argues lead is the new gold in a destabilized society.
And the final 10% goes into high-quality bourbon.
It is a portfolio explicitly designed for societal collapse and absolute financial independence from the traditional banking system.
And he shares several anecdotes to illustrate the effectiveness of this strategy.
He highlights a Texas dad who completely ignored his wife's demand to fund a $300 Easter brunch.
Instead, he took an ASIC crypto miner, plugged it into his wife's unused Peloton outlet to mine Bitcoin.
And now reportedly generates $500 a month in passive income.
That is an unbelievable workaround. You take the electricity meant for a status symbol exercise bike and use it to mint decentralized currency.
He also brings up this guy Mike from Toledo, which might be the most legally fascinating part of the book.
Oh man. Mike's ex-wife's lawyer was trying to aggressively garnish his paycheck for alimony.
So instead of buying his kids expensive chocolate eggs or video games for Easter, Mike started buying them pre-1965 Roosevelt dimes.
This relies on a very specific economic loophole that Riker praises highly. Pre-1965 Roosevelt dimes are composed of 90% silver.
Meaning they contain 0.0723 ounces of constitutional silver per coin.
For those who don't follow precious metals, constitutional silver refers to U.S. coins minted before the government removed the silver content to debase the currency.
They inherently hold the value of the metal regardless of what the dollar does.
Exactly. By gifting these specific dimes to his children, Mike placed tangible, appreciating assets directly into their piggy banks.
When the family court demanded he liquidate his assets to cover the alimony garnishments, the judge legally couldn't confiscate the children's property.
The ex-wife's attorneys reportedly called it financial abuse, but Riker frames it as a masterclass in teaching fiscal responsibility while legally bypassing an unjust family court system.
That is a fascinating, albeit extreme, weaponization of metallurgy to bypass the legal system.
But this raises a major question for me.
Yeah.
If we step back and look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
how does a man actually exist in a family structure if he implements a full Easter blackout?
That is a fair point.
If you just sit in your garage on a Sunday staring at a Bitcoin hard wallet while your wife and kids are inside, aren't you just isolating yourself? You're basically abdicating your role in the family.
That is a crucial critique, and Riker actually anticipates it.
He does.
He explicitly states that he does not advocate for men to do nothing and hide away in the garage. His argument is that men must replace the passive consumerist holiday with active, hyper-masculine survivalist rituals.
He wants men to lead their families, but he demands they lead them in a radically different direction.
Right. And that is the perfect bridge to the fourth and final segment of the book, the Alpha Playbook.
This is where Riker moves from theory to practice. He details the actionable physical protocols that red-pilled men need to implement to forge resilient father-son bonds and resurrect the primal code.
The focus of the Alpha Playbook is entirely on physical competence, skill acquisition, and shared hardship.
He introduces the concept of resurrection ranges.
He argues that instead of having boys wander around a manicured lawn looking for hidden candy, which he reiterates trains them for dependency and scavenging,
Fathers should host archery tournaments and axe-throwing competitions.
he writes that egg hunts train betas, but hitting targets builds leaders.
And he backs this up with data, citing a 2020 Harvard research study. According to Riker's interpretation, the study claims that boys who are actively taught survival skills and marksmanship test 40% higher in psychological resilience than those raised on soft comforts.
The prize for winning the archery tournament isn't a chocolate bunny. It's a stag skull or a high-quality hunting knife.
He takes this concept of shared hardship and physical challenge even further with a protocol he calls the Esther Iron Fast.
This is not for the faint of heart. It is a grueling 72-hour protocol designed for fathers and teenage sons.
It involves active hunting, complete caloric fasting, and building wilderness shelters in the snow or extreme elements.
What is the biological payoff for that level of misery?
Well, Riker cites the Journal of Evolutionary Health to explain the mechanism. He claims that this specific combination of extreme physical stress, cold exposure, and fasting actually shocks the endocrine system.
Resulting in a testosterone boost of 31%.
He frames it as a biological reset button, flushing out the domestic lethargy and rebooting the warrior physiology.
And what's wild is that he shares so many real-world examples of men actually doing this in their communities.
There's the story of Mike Ragnar's sons in suburban Ohio. While all the neighborhood moms were out buying plastic eggs filled with high fructose corn syrup, Mike took his boys out and taught them to trap and hunt.
On Easter morning, instead of a basket, his kids literally dragged a 150-pound deer carcass into their suburban kitchen to field dress it on the linoleum.
It is a profound rejection of the pastel aesthetic. Riker also highlights Chad Wilson in Idaho, who completely reimagined the Easter basket.
Instead of candy, Chad packed his kids' baskets with rattlesnake skins, flint and steel fire starters, and homemade beef jerky.
Which I'm sure went over great with the PTA.
The author notes that Chad Wilson's actions actually resulted in concerned neighbors calling the police, claiming the children were being subjected to trauma.
But Riker frames this police visit as a massive victory.
He notes that the boys absolutely loved the survival gear, proving that the primal instinct was still intact despite the neighbors' objections.
He also mentions a father in Wisconsin who hosted a massive backyard axe-throwing tournament on Easter Sunday.
The neighbors predictably complained about the noise and the optics of men throwing steel.
But according to Riker, when the responding police officers arrived and saw the leaderboard and the raw competition, they actually took off their belts and stayed to compete in the tournament themselves.
Riker uses that specific anecdote as proof of concept. He argues that when you offer men, even men operating within the bounds of the state purposum, real primal war games and genuine competition,
they will instantly drop the pastel act and revert to their biological programming.
But he also acknowledges that society is going to push back against this.
He talks about how to keep this movement alive if the digital grid goes down, or if ESG algorithms try to censor their communications.
And this leads to one of the most sci-fi elements of the book, Luddite labs.
Yes, Riker touches on the technological war for masculinity. He describes a rogue artificial intelligence created by an off-grid developer group called Luddite Labs.
According to the text, they trained a large language model exclusively on the texts of Sun Tzu's Art of War, Marcus Aurelius, and other ancient Stoic philosophers.
The sole purpose of this AI is to generate uncensored, strategic Easter battle plans and survivalist protocols, completely insulated from modern corporate censorship or algorithmic bias.
It's like Skynet, but programmed entirely for stoicism and wilderness survival.
It is fascinating how he ties the ancient philosophy with cutting-edge tech. Reading through this alpha playbook, absorbing the focus on isolation, physical suffering, and rebirth, it honestly reminded me of the movie Rocky the First.
That is an incredibly astute connection because Riker actually dedicates a portion of the conclusion to calling Rocky the First a literal theological Easter allegory.
Walk me through his logic on that, because on the surface, a Cold War boxing movie doesn't immediately scream spring equinox.
He draws a very direct structural parallel. In Rocky Third, Apollo Creed dies in the ring, which Riker says represents the death of the old guard, the death of complacency.
Rocky is devastated, and to prepare for the resurrection of his spirit in his title, he exiles himself to the frozen, hostile wilderness of Soviet Russia.
Right, while Ivan Drago is in a high-tech facility getting injected with steroids and monitored by scientists, Rocky is entirely off-grid.
He's lifting heavy rocks and nets, chopping massive logs, and running through knee-deep snow.
Exactly. Rocky resurrects himself through brutal, agonizing physical combat against nature and then against Drago.
Riker uses this cinematic art to illustrate his core philosophical tenet. Thorns protect lilies.
Meaning that the softness, beauty, and peace of society can only exist if they are guarded by hard, dangerous men who are willing to bleed in the freezing cold.
The pastel bunny cannot protect the garden, only the brawling hare can.
That is the ultimate goal of Riker's entire manifesto. He isn't just trying to change what you eat or wear on a Sunday in April.
He is actively advocating for the creation of a decentralized, off-grid brotherhood.
He envisions a network of men bound by shared hardships, survival skills, and untraceable hard assets, capable of outliving the societal collapse he believes is inevitable.
Wow. Okay, so let's pull all of this together and synthesize this deep dive. Conrad Riker's Eli5 Easter. The simple guide for red-pilled men is not just a critique of a holiday, it is a highly provocative, unapologetic war manual.
It is speaking directly to red-pilled men, urging them to look at the deep history of this season.
Recognize how the primal masculine roots were captured and sterilized by institutions over millennia, and demanding that they completely reject the modern iteration.
He wants men to swap pastel consumerism, crushing brunch debt, and docile bunny mascots for Bitcoin, venison, axe throwing, and survivalism to reclaim the raw warrior energy of spring.
It is a thorough, uncompromising deconstruction of modern aesthetics and biology.
backed by historical claims ranging from Emperor Constantine to Victorian fabric mills, and paired with aggressive economic strategies designed to starve what he views as a feminized, anti-male economy.
If this deep dive sparked your interest and you want to read the raw data, the full arguments, and the step-by-step protocols for yourself, you must check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Eli5 Easter, the simple guide for red-pilled men.
The book is packed with even more historical analysis and survivalist examples than we could possibly cover in an hour.
Also, if you want to follow the author's ongoing work and his decentralized strategies, you should absolutely follow him at Conrad Riker on his Substack.
And hey, before you go, please hit that like button and subscribe to this show so you never miss another deep dive into the books and controversial ideas that are shaping the culture from the underground up.
As we wrap up today's exploration, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder on your own, circling back to our opening thought about the true nature of ancient traditions.
If human biology and neurochemistry are truly hardwired for struggle, conquest, and resource acquisition, exactly as this author claims,
What happens to a civilization's collective mental health when its oldest, most sacred myths of primal resurrection are permanently sanitized into safe, frictionless, commercialized experiences?
does that primal energy just disappear or does it retreat into the shadows waiting to erupt somewhere else?